Welcome to Our Girl Relationships. On this channel, we discuss day-to-day problems people face in their lives. Let's start with the video. My wife and her sister were never really the tightest of two. They didn't get along growing up and they argued very often, as both of them were around the same age and were believed to be their parents as favorites, which was even more reason for them to argue and fight growing up. But as time passed and they grew up, their arguments and topics of disputes matured and changed with them. Despite all the arguments that normal siblings have, nothing normal could cause the fallout that one single event did. What happened is that a few years back, before my wife and I met each other and started dating, she was going out with a guy she met in university and they ended up getting and staying together for a year and a half before he started exuding toxic behavior and showing manipulative set of traits that my wife just didn't feel like she belonged with and deserved better, rightfully so. She decided she wanted to end the relationship with him. The problem is not here. The problem resides in the fact that soon after my wife and her ex-boyfriend broke up, her sister, aka my sister-in-law, started sniffing around him and asking weird questions, insinuating that there could be a chance she was interested in getting with him, and quickly after, as in a couple of weeks later, she did indeed start going out with him, as she asked him on a date and started taking their interactions towards a serious direction. My wife stood entirely opposed to the relationship, not necessarily because he was her ex-boyfriend, but because he had forced himself upon her and basically assaulted her after they had broken up. Despite her expressing her lack of desire to indulge in anything romantic or sexual with him, he still forced himself on her one last time, and that was the last time they saw each other. And so, when she figured out that the sister was sniffing around the ex-boyfriend, my wife started taking a more aggressive tone of speech and telling her that if she started dating him, she would stop talking to her. And eventually, she did actually do that, as the relationship became more and more serious, and my sister-in-law became less shy and more intrusive when expressing her feelings toward him, even when talking to my wife. My wife then decided it would be better to just cut off any conversations about relationships and personal lives, which eventually led to their relationship falling apart. She ended up stopping any contact with her sister as well as asking for any news or updates about her and has really found her really newly found love. She came to find out a few months after that the sister-in-law and her boyfriend, aka my wife's rapist ex-boyfriend, were getting married. Needless to say, my wife was infuriated and offended as her sister had taken her emotions and experiences and traumas and crushed them down with disrespect and disregard. It was very demeaning to my wife and she felt extremely insulted and undermined, so she chose not to go and attend the wedding. Not only because it would be extremely awkward to watch your sister get married to your ex-boyfriend, but it would be too painful a memory for her to come face to face with her rapist and congratulate him on marrying her sister. What ended up happening is that the sister-in-law took it to heart and got offended on her newly wedded husband's behalf and entirely stopped talking to my wife after arguing with her on the phone once again. I wouldn't really say that their relationship falling apart was because they couldn't agree over a dude or let go of emotions or anything. It was because my sister-in-law was disregarding and disrespecting my wife's emotions that were rightfully and understandably intense considering the circumstances. Right after the marriage started, the husband ended up getting involved in a car accident and passing away almost immediately. And my wife found herself rushing to her sister to comfort her in times of pain and help her with her grieving process and be there for her to guide her through it as my father-in-law and mother-in-law passed away not so long ago, and my wife and sister-in-law ended up being the only people there to have one another's backs. Their relationship began to get a lot stronger than it was before, since now they had something to consider as mutual grounds, which was grief and support for each other. And things were left the way for a few solid months. As their relationship began to get stronger and stronger by the passing day, my wife felt the need to introduce me to her sister in a more casual, friendly, and less formal way, as the only time we had met before was just a formal introduction at the funeral. She started inviting me to go with them to brunch or inviting me over with her to her sister's house where we would sit and converse about things and just hang out as adults going through life. My wife and I quickly started to notice a strange change in demeanor that the sister-in-law was exuding towards me. It started out as simple observations that were very meticulous and out of place and maybe even bizarre, such as complimenting the buttons on my sweaters or taking profound interest in my field of work despite it being a bunch of paperwork and boring statistics. Then it started increasing and shapeshifting into physical and emotional compliments, complimenting my level of intellect in a very sensual way or describing very specific details in a man that would be her dream man, and listing traits were prominently present within me. We both recognized how strange her behavior had been getting, and once again, I became uncomfortable with the sister's behavior until she got to a tipping point which resulted from sister-in-law telling my wife that it's bizarre how my wife and I met and how we got along despite being so different. And she would constantly insinuate that the sister-in-law and I are very compatible and that we would have been very close friends if we had met in college. What tipped my wife over the edge is when she nudged her way closer to me, put her arm around me, and tangled her hand in my hand, and said that we would have made such a lovely couple. My wife and I have not met each other. My wife then snapped at her and told her all the things she'd been thinking all throughout her flirtatious period with me, as it was becoming extremely obvious that she was seeking something malevolent or sinister. She told her that this was not a scenario that was about to replay itself where the sister-in-law would disregard and disrespect the sister's emotions and take her boundaries mockingly and not care for what she says and just ignore all bases and premises of moralities and priorities. And that she would not be taking any of it now because having a dead husband does not exempt her from not flirting with me, and having a dead husband does not give you a green pass to flirt with other people's husbands. Especially when the dead husband is an ex-boyfriend and a rapist that was a result for a fallout between two sisters. Now, I can't really say if my wife had taken it too far by saying this and the things she said to her that day, but the argument and dispute did lead to a small tiny little fallout in which they stopped talking to each other for a few weeks. I started telling my wife that she needed to build her relationship with her sister again and have a go at it because they were the only ones that could be there for each other and the only blood-related family that they had. And my wife expressed her fury at me as she didn't want me supporting her or even speaking her name in our household. Being the kind-hearted and loving woman she is, she found it within her to forgive her sister and tried building a relationship with her again. The relationship has started getting better recently as they went back to hanging out and being around each other and even inviting me to stay with them. But one thing's for sure, my sister-in-law hasn't and will never dare to flirt with me ever again, now that she has seen what my wife is capable of expressing if her boundaries are crossed. Not the a-hole. Your wife is not the bad guy in this case because it's clearly the same situation replaying itself with just a different approach and colors. It's a good thing that you both acknowledged it and your wife made the right decision to stand up for herself and defend her marriage. The sister, on the other hand, just seems like a toxic pattern of behavior for me. She'll try to steal things from your wife's hands over and over again, and you should be careful of what she targets next. Not the a-hole. Although I can see that your wife's way of speaking is a bit harsh considering that sister-in-law is still coping. I can also see that this is a pattern and it's not just a way of coping or grieving. She likes to butt heads with your wife either as competition or jealousy or just straight up toxicity. I'm not confident she'll stop flirting with you for good or even try ruining other aspects of your wife's life, but that's definitely a proposition to keep in mind. Not the a-hole. The wife's a bit savage for saying that, even though it's not in any disrespectful way or over-intensified. She chose the right words to describe the right decision for the sake of defending her marriage, and I respect that immensely. I don't have any respect for the sister that seems to be holding some sort of vendetta or fantasy to stand in your wife's way. I think you should minimize contact with her if you think it's necessary to stay in touch. You need to keep an eye on her. Next story. My 28 male, fiance, 27 female, and I are getting married next June after dating for 10 years. I'm white, British, from a village, and she's South Asian. My parents love her and are welcoming of her, calling her a beautiful Indian princess, although it hasn't been much of a cultural shock for them. She's very anglicized, Brit accent because she lived in several countries before coming to the UK at 17. She went through a lot of racism before, which was horrible and direct, so she doesn't complain about small things. By that I mean comments my parents make out of ignorance, like teasing her for her name, making jokes about terrorists, her family are not practicing Muslims, how our children will all be called Muhammad, saying they would give our kids English nicknames because we're planning to give them cultural names, or calling her an Indian kitchen maid if she's doing chores, telling her when she gets pregnant she'll have a deli belly. She doesn't react to those comments, but I know they upset her and she doesn't say it because she knows it could be worse. Last week, her parents came over to meet mine and they flew over in a 15-hour flight. Her parents aren't as anglicized as she is and have heavy accents. I was so embarrassed when we went for dinner and my dad started talking to them in an Indian accent. My mom kept asking her mom about dowries and forced marriages, which confused them because they were obviously not that traditional if they were happy with their daughter marrying me. She also asked her mom if I died, would my fiancé jump into the cremation fire, kept calling our Indian wedding, which they wanted, a big costume party. Then my dad, after some drinks, started making bomb jokes when the waiter came like, "Oh, be careful, Mr. X might blow this place up if you don't do his steak right." I could see my fiancé was embarrassed, but she didn't say anything. After the dinner, she went to her parents' hotel and I confronted my parents about the things they said. I have always told them that these jokes add up, but they brushed it off because she never said anything. I asked her why she never did, and she said, "What would I look like if I started this fight? Why do I have to be the one that stirs the pot?" My parents started arguing that it was because they never had exposure to South Asians. That's not true. We live in a village, but it's near a huge multicultural city. Also, we dated for 10 years. It's unfair. Her family are wealthy and move in socialite circles while mine are working class, but her parents never were classists even though they were used to rich people. I got angry and said maybe our wedding is one costume party they might not be invited to. They would be, I just said it out of anger. My mom started crying and my dad called my fiancé and told her the fuss I made because of her, and now she's awkward too. I don't know who I offended and how, but am I the a-hole? Everyone sucks here except your fiancé and her parents. Your parents for obviously racist reasons. You let them do this for a decade to the woman you love. You let it continue and blow up when you could have nipped it in the bud and educated your parents instead of letting them develop a habit of being hurtful. This is exactly everyone sucks here, you and your parents, because your parents have been making racist remarks for 10 years. It's not a joke if the target isn't laughing, and you didn't stop them, so of course they continue their behavior with her parents. Clue for the clueless, she's probably afraid of consequences if she speaks up, disrespectfully in her culture maybe, to her potential in-laws, which is why she hasn't said anything for 10 years. Edited to add, joking about Uncle Tim's beard is not punching down to someone in a more precarious position than you. Joking about a newcomer's appearance and or culture is definitely punching down. You're the a-hole for the threat not actually being sincere. Effing hell, they've been openly racist to your fiancé for 10 years, and now they're openly racist to her parents. When are you actually going to start standing up for them? Your fiancé's awkward because what you said made it worse for her without actually being any help for her because she knows you won't defend her. You're the a-hole. Your parents' racist comments have been happening for 10 years. 10 freaking years. Your silence has told them that their comments and behavior are okay. Even though she hasn't been reacting to their comments, you should have been each and every time. As a white person, I'm going to ask you to be more active in shutting this racist crap down. Are you going to be okay if people, your parents, make comments to your kids like this if you have them? Next story. I, female 23, am 36 weeks pregnant. I chose to keep the baby after her dad said he didn't want it and continued with pregnancy, knowing I would be a single mom. He later contacts me and says he does want to be involved, but is super wishy-washy, like sometimes he was in a good mood, otherwise he'd lash out. I believe people deserve grace and that if he wants to be involved, I should allow him no matter how much he has hurt me. He has made it explicitly clear to me that he does not want to formally pay child support. He's military and his contract ends in October. He will not be moving closer to the baby. He will continue on with his life plans for college and would only see her maybe once a month. Again, I do not believe you get anywhere forcing anyone to do anything, so I'm willing to work him into her life keeping those things in mind. Now, I do know that it is best for children, especially in separate households, to have stability and least conflict as possible, so I've been trying to get him to talk about a custody arrangement parenting plan so we can discuss boundaries and expectations and stuff like that. I've been mostly ignored. Today he finally got back to me and said he wanted a DNA test. I said no problem, but you won't be able to sign AOP or birth certificate until DNA results and you'd have to initiate that whole process through the AG's office. And would have zero rights or responsibilities until then. And that if that was the case, I wanted her to have my last name. I also sent him a link to a prenatal DNA test lab where you can get the results in 3 days. but said he would have to pay and schedule an appointment. He said at most he would pay half if I'm claiming it's his kid, I should pay for it and schedule the appointment. I said no, absolutely not. I know he's the father, and to me, him being legally tied to her doesn't make any kind of difference. Am I the a-hole for not backing down and paying for half the DNA test? In my point of view, he has not paid for anything to do with the baby, and he hasn't really been planning on it in the future from what I've gathered, and I'm tired of dealing with him and would rather him not be involved at all. But maybe that's selfish to the baby. I don't know. I was leaning toward not the a-hole, but I'm going everyone sucks here. You need a reality check. In your effort to come off as easygoing, you're hurting your child. Those laws are in place for a reason. They protect you, him, and most of all, your child. Good for you for setting a hard boundary and sticking to your guns. Go through the proper channels. He wants a selfie kid. He wants a baby to parade around on IG and show what a good father he is, but none of the tough stuff. You will be the one up with this baby all night with ear infections. You will be the one dealing with financial difficulties when there's no formal agreement in place because you didn't want to force anything on him. You don't get to cherry pick which stuff you want to be involved in. Good fathers and mothers are praised for being such because they're willing to make the sacrifices and tough decisions. Not the a-hole. I can tell you right now you shouldn't be supporting him being involved. A father who comes and goes as he pleases with no consistent time spent with the child is damaging and not beneficial to the child. You should also speak to a lawyer before you continue communicating with this guy. Know your rights and what exactly will happen to them once paternity is established. When you do talk to him, I suggest email or text so there's a record of what he's saying. You want to really keep on top of evidence of his behavior. He said, she said stuff doesn't get you far. This is your child. You need to start taking things a lot more seriously than it sounds in your post. How does he have time to be in the military while working his full-time gig making red flags? This guy sounds awful. You have no responsibility to him at all. If he wants a test, he should pay for it. If he wants to be in the kid's life, or even if he doesn't, he needs to pay support. He needs to agree to custody terms and he needs to follow your lead. You hold all the cards here. You're ultimately signed on for a lifetime of caring for the child. He doesn't get to sign in and out for entertainment whenever he likes. It's not a Netflix account. It's a baby. Keep laying down the law and don't give him anything you don't have to. You'll regret it later. Absolutely not the a-hole.